Before we begin tonight's story, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. It may sound simple, but your support tells us you want more tales of humanity's darkest legends and greatest triumphs. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Now, let's step into the shadows of a prison where one death awakened the galaxy's greatest fear. The cell was small, the kind of place designed not just to hold but to humiliate. No windows, no softness. The walls were made of alloy, dulled by centuries of grime, their only purpose to remind the prisoner that the galaxy had reduced her to nothing more than a body in a box. The woman sat on the floor, her back straight despite the weariness in her eyes. She had not cried when they dragged her here, and she would not cry now. Her name had been stripped from her the day they captured her. To the guards she was nothing but human female number 7. To herself she was still who she had always been. Someone's wife, someone's partner, someone's reason for laughter on nights that otherwise would have been unbearable. That thought was her final act of rebellion, to remember love in a place where cruelty was currency. The guards passed her cell in pairs, their voices echoing down the corridor, guttural and mocking. They belonged to the Varick, a reptilian species whose empire had swelled across star systems through terror and speed. To them, humans were newcomers, fragile things with soft skin and sentimental attachments. Easy prey. The guards jeered when they looked inside, their yellow eyes gleaming through the bars. Still alive, one muttered, his voice carrying a hiss. Stronger than she looks, these humans. Strong, his companion scoffed. No. Stubborn. Like rodents. Break the body, they cling with the teeth. They laughed, their claws scraping the door as they moved on. The woman's hands trembled, though she hid it by clasping them together. Every hour stretched like a lifetime in that cage, every sound a reminder that she was prey among predators. Yet she kept her silence. She had learned silence could wound them more deeply than words. They wanted her fear, she refused them that. It was on the third night that they came for her. The footsteps were heavier, not the careless gait of guards but the ordered march of officers. 3 Varick entered, their armor dark, their faces carved with the indifference of executioners. She stood when they unlocked the cell. Not because she believed she could resist, she had no illusions, but because standing meant she would not be dragged. They led her to the central chamber where other prisoners had been broken before. The air smelled of iron and ozone, thick with the memory of suffering. A dozen guards lined the walls. A high-ranking officer lounged in a seat above, his scaled chin resting on his claws. He studied her with the curiosity one might give an insect before crushing it beneath a boot. This human, the officer said, his voice slow and deliberate, refuses to answer questions. Refuses to beg. Refuses to submit. Do you know what happens to such creatures? The woman raised her chin. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. The officer sneered. They die. The order was given with a flick of his claw. One of the guards stepped forward, his weapon humming as energy gathered at the tip. The chamber grew quiet, every alien eye fixed on the human woman who did not kneel. She closed her eyes, and in that moment she was not in the prison. She was somewhere else entirely, sitting on a quiet porch, listening to a voice that once told her the galaxy was worth fighting for. The weapon discharged. The silence that followed was absolute. Her body crumpled to the floor, smoke rising from the wound, but her dignity did not fall with her. Even in death she had denied them the fear they craved. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some of the younger guards smirked, pleased by the display. But not all. A handful shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something about this kill was different, though they could not yet say why. The officer gestured for her body to be removed. Dispose of it. One less nuisance. It should have ended there. Yet as 2 guards lifted her lifeless form, one of them muttered under his breath, pity. Her mate would have come for her, had he known. Another guard snorted. Her mate? That human soldier? The one they whispered about during the wars. He chuckled. What did they call him? Wraith? Phantom? No, the first guard's scales paled, his voice faltering. Reaper. The word fell into the chamber like a blade. Every alien within hearing distance stilled. Even the officer's amused posture stiffened, his yellow eyes narrowing. Reaper? He echoed. The guard swallowed. Yes, that was his call sign. In the Terran conflicts, he is said to. Enough. The officer's voice cracked like a whip. He rose from his seat, his expression suddenly strained. Around the chamber, whispers ignited. Reaper. A name not spoken lightly. A name tied to the ruin of fleets, to assassinations carried out in silence, to battles where entire garrisons vanished overnight. Most dismissed the stories as human propaganda, exaggerated legends to make their kind seem fierce. Yet every empire contained survivors, broken commanders, scarred veterans, who spoke of one soldier who did not simply kill but hunted, who never stopped until nothing remained but wreckage and corpses. And now they had killed his wife. For the first time in hours, the woman's body was treated with something resembling caution. The guards carried her carefully, as if her stillness might awaken into wrath. The officer barked orders for silence, but the fear had already taken root. Whispers of Reaper spread like cracks through stone. In the darkness of the prison corridors, the woman's passing left behind more than grief. It left a question that none dared answer aloud. If the Reaper still lived and if he learned what had been done here, what would follow? And though the Varric prided themselves on domination, none of them felt entirely secure as the chamber emptied. The silence that lingered after her death was not victory, it was dread. Somewhere far beyond the stars, a man would hear of this. And when he did, the galaxy would remember why they had feared the Reaper. The message reached him in fragments, carried through back channels and encrypted frequencies the galaxy thought he had abandoned. At first it was only a rumor, a whisper among mercenary crews and deserters. A woman executed in a Varric prison, her body discarded like trash. Then came the name. Human. Civilian. Married. The pieces fitted together in a way that turned rumor into certainty. He sat alone when the truth reached him, a dimly lit compartment on a forgotten freighter drifting through the void. The hum of the ship's engines was steady, the glow of a single console bathing his scarred face in pale light. He did not shout, nor curse, nor allow the grief to claw free. Instead he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the Reaper was awake. The man had been many things across his life: soldier, strategist, weapon unleashed in wars that should have ended humanity before it began. But to his wife, he had been nothing more than a man who came home when he could, who laughed in quiet moments, who promised to leave the fighting behind. She had been the tether that held him to the world he had promised her. With her gone, the tether snapped. His hands moved over the console, not with rage but with precision. He accessed encrypted caches left dormant for years, codes and contacts buried so deeply the galaxy thought them erased. One by one they awakened, old networks, old allies, old shadows. On his display, signals began to respond, flickering back into life like embers stirred into flame. Across the sector, mercenaries stiffened when they heard the call. Smugglers paused mid-run, bounty hunters lowered their drinks, and even seasoned soldiers felt a chill crawl down their spines. The whispers spread faster than any official transmission. Reaper was moving. In a pirate den orbiting a shattered moon, a grizzled commander spat out his drink when he saw the code. Not him. Not again. In a Varric war council, an officer tried to dismiss the rumor. One human cannot shake an empire. Yet his voice quivered, and he remembered the scars left by battles where fleets vanished into wreckage. The Reaper's legend was not forged in numbers. It was born in the silence after his work was done, in the absence of survivors, in the certainty that if he set his sights upon you, there would be no escape. He rose from his seat and began to prepare. Weapons long kept hidden were checked and assembled, their weight familiar in his hands. Armor scarred from a dozen campaigns was sealed over his body. He did not rush. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, the calm of a predator who knows the kill is inevitable. Hours later, a Varric listening post sat in silence, its crew drowsy with boredom. The alarms never had a chance to sound. Shadows moved where no shadows should, and one by one the outpost defenders fell. Some tried to fight, their energy rifles blazing against bulkheads. But the man who walked among them was not flesh to be resisted. He was inevitability. When the last of them choked out his breath on the metal floor, the Reaper stood over the commander. The alien writhed, wounded but alive, his scaled hands clutching at the wound in his side. Why? The alien rasped. The Reaper knelt beside him, his voice low, almost tender. Because you were here. He extracted the data he needed with swift precision, leaving behind only silence and corpses. The outpost burned in the void, a flare of destruction that sent ripples across the communication nets. Each strike that followed was the same, surgical, merciless, impossible to predict. Pirate crews who had profited from the Varric found their ships gutted. Smugglers who had carried chains for human prisoners vanished into debris. His movements were untraceable, his methods varied, but the pattern was clear. He was hunting and the trail led toward the prison world. Across the stars, whispers grew into fear. In cantinas and council halls, in bunkers and boardrooms, one name returned to every tongue: Reaper. The sound of it alone was enough to stiffen spines and empty rooms. No one wanted to be the next Mark. But the Varric could not ignore him. Reports piled high on the council tables. Lost outposts, scattered fleets, survivors babbling incoherently about a human who struck from nowhere and left nothing behind. Some demanded reinforcements be sent to the prison. Others argued for diplomacy. None could escape the realization dawning over them. This was not a war they had chosen. It was vengeance. Meanwhile, he pressed forward, a single man carrying the weight of annihilation in his steady steps. His wife's face lingered in his mind, not as she died but as she had once lived, smiling, unafraid, her hand warm in his. Each memory sharpened his resolve, cutting away hesitation until only purpose remained. He did not rage. He did not waver. The Reaper had only one destination, and the galaxy was beginning to understand what that meant. By the time the prison world's defenses caught whispers of his approach, entire sectors had gone silent. Ships dispatched to intercept him never returned. Patrols sent to scout the void vanished. No one could explain how a single man was dismantling an empire's reach piece by piece, and yet the evidence was undeniable. He stood at the helm of the vessel he had seized, the stars stretching endlessly before him. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a man stripped of everything but purpose, a figure the galaxy had once begged never to awaken again. And now, with his course set and his wife's killers waiting, he smiled, a cold, thin thing devoid of joy. The Reaper was coming home. The galaxy was vast, but fear traveled faster than light. By the time the Varric Council convened in their armored chambers, the whispers had already reached worlds untouched by the conflict. Outposts silenced. Patrols gone. Fleets returning in fragments, their survivors babbling incoherently about shadows that struck from nowhere and left only wreckage. One word was repeated again and again, whispered with the terror of a curse: Reaper. The counselors argued, their voices sharp and panicked. Some demanded retaliation, others urged negotiation, while a few spoke only in low, trembling tones, as though the sound of his name alone might summon him to their chamber. None could agree, but all understood the truth: they had awakened something they could not control. A general slammed his clawed fist onto the table. He is one human. One. How can he dismantle an empire? We are the Varric. We have crushed worlds. We have broken species. Shall we cower before a myth? Yet even as he spoke, his eyes betrayed him. For he had seen the reports, the still images broadcast from shattered fleets, images marked by a single human insignia etched into bulkheads, painted in the blood of the fallen. A scythe, crude yet unmistakable. The survivors claimed it was no weapon, no symbol meant for intimidation. It was simply his mark. Proof that the Reaper had been there. Across the galaxy, mercenaries began to refuse Varric contracts. Traitors avoided their space. Even allies began to pull away, fearing association. The Reaper was not just a man. He was becoming contagion, spreading instability wherever his shadow touched. Meanwhile, he moved without pause. Each strike was carefully chosen, not to annihilate at random but to sever arteries, cutting communication, choking supply lines, dismantling the hidden infrastructure that kept the prison world secure. He did not always kill. Sometimes he let one or two survivors crawl back to their masters, shaking and broken, their eyes wide with the memory of what they had seen. Their words became scripture in the growing mythology of his return. On the bridge of his stolen vessel, Reaper studied the star charts with unyielding focus. Every red pin represented another silence he had created. Every line drawn across the map was a path narrowing toward his target. His wife's face lingered in his mind, the quiet strength in her gaze, the promise she had been denied. Each memory stoked the furnace inside him, but he wore his rage like armor, never allowing it to dictate his hand. In the silence between battles he spoke to no one. The ship answered only to him, its systems obeying his calculated commands. The galaxy might imagine him surrounded by legions, supported by hidden armies. The truth was more terrifying. He was alone. And that was enough. In a distant sector, an alien mercenary crew shared drinks in a smoke-filled den, their laughter strained. One of them, a scarred veteran, set down his cup with a trembling hand. "I fought him once," he murmured. The table went quiet. Not him alone but his unit. He led them. We outnumbered them 10 to 1. We had firepower, position, everything. And still, they cut through us. He was the one who broke us. He doesn't kill for pleasure. He kills because it's what he was made to do. And he never stops until the work is done. The younger mercenaries shifted uneasily, their bravado slipping. None dared speak after that. Back in the Varric Council chamber, panic hardened into division. Some insisted on fortifying the prison, pouring resources into defenses that might hold him back. Others argued that such a display would only provoke him further. Rumors swirled that a few counselors had already fled the core worlds, retreating into exile rather than risk his wrath. But the prison world's commander had no such luxury. He stood at the center of his fortified bastion, his scales pale with unease as reports flooded in. Ships dispatched to intercept Reaper's vessel had vanished. Reinforcements sent to flank him were destroyed before they could even reach their posts. Each failure gnawed at the commander's confidence, each whisper of his approach a blade to the gut. One night, as the prison's artificial sky dimmed, the commander walked the corridors where the woman had once been kept. He paused at the chamber where she had died, his claws clicking against the floor. The silence weighed heavily as if her absence had left a scar in the very walls. A guard approached, hesitant. "Sir. The men, they are restless. They speak of him." The commander turned, his voice low. "And what do they say?" "They say he is already here. That he moves in the dark. That he has marked us." The commander's jaw tightened. He wanted to lash out, to strike the insolence from the guard's throat, but the truth coiled around him like chains. He too felt it, the sense of a presence drawing closer, inevitable, unstoppable. In the void beyond, Reaper's ship moved like a predator gliding through the dark. His course was set, but he did not rush. He dismantled everything in his path, piece by piece, ensuring that when he finally reached the prison world, it would stand alone, stripped of its allies, isolated and trembling. The galaxy watched, breath held as if waiting for the storm to break. In cantinas, in barracks, in palaces, the question lingered on every tongue. What would he do when he arrived? Would he burn the prison to the ground? Would he slaughter every living soul within? Or would he do something worse, something none could predict? Those who knew of him, truly knew, understood one thing. Whatever came, it would not be quick. It would not be merciful. The Reaper's legend had always been painted in whispers and shadows. But now, for the first time in generations, the galaxy saw him not as a ghost but as a man. A man moving toward the place where his wife had been murdered. A man with nothing left to lose. And as the prison world prepared its defenses, as the council fractured under the weight of fear, as mercenaries and outlaws chose sides or fled into hiding, one truth settled over every corner of the stars. The Reaper was not coming for war. He was coming for vengeance. And there was nothing in the galaxy that could stand in his way. The prison world hung in orbit like a fortress, its spires of steel and black alloy jutting into the void. Layers of shields shimmered faintly across its surface, and fleets drifted in disciplined formations, their weapons locked outward in readiness. To the Varric it was impregnable. To the Reaper, it was nothing but prey that had cornered itself. He approached in silence, piloting a vessel that was not his but bore his mark nonetheless, stolen from those who had underestimated him. No broadcasts announced his arrival. No threats were sent ahead. He allowed the prison commanders to see him on their sensors, let them tremble at the realization that nothing they had sent before had stopped him. Inside the command tower, alarms wailed. The prison commander stood rigid before the holographic display, watching the lone human vessel slip through the void as though it had every right to be there. Orders spilled from his mouth: activate the guns, prime the interceptors, launch every fighter into the dark. His claws clenched around the railing as his voice cracked. Do not let him land. The fleet surged forward. Dozens of ships moved to intercept. Turrets on the prison's surface ignited, lances of energy cutting through the void. Yet the vessel did not break. Shields flared, systems adjusted, and then, without warning, the ship veered at impossible angles, slipping between fire as though it already knew where every shot would fall. The first wave of fighters was gone before they understood they had engaged. Explosions rippled across the stars, scattering debris like shrapnel. The second wave broke formation when they saw their leader's craft ripped apart in seconds. Panic spread as systems failed, comms filled with screams, and the legend of the Reaper grew teeth. Inside the stolen vessel, the man at the helm did not flinch. His breathing was steady, his movements efficient, every decision calculated for maximum terror. This was not a battle, it was an execution. By the time his ship pierced the atmosphere, the fleet that had sworn to hold the line was little more than wreckage burning in the sky. The prison world shook with the first impact. The stolen vessel plowed into the surface, tearing through defenses before burying itself in steel and fire. For a heartbeat, silence held the survivors in a fragile grip. Then the silence broke. He stepped from the wreckage like a figure born of flame, armor scorched but intact, weapons in hand. The first squad of guards opened fire, their rifles spitting arcs of energy down the smoke-filled corridor. He moved through them with brutal precision, each step forward marked by another corpse on the floor. His shots were not wild bursts but deliberate executions, each alien cut down before they could reload, before they could run. Panic rippled through the prison's halls. Sirens screamed, boots thundered across metal floors, and orders shouted by desperate officers dissolved into chaos. The prisoners, alien and human alike, heard the fighting and fell into hushed awe. The whispers spread faster than the alarms. The Reaper is here. In the central hub, squads rallied, their weapons raised, their eyes darting nervously to every shadow. The lights flickered. A vent crashed open. By the time they fired, he was already among them. Blades flashed, gunfire roared, and within seconds the hub was painted with the aftermath. Only one soldier remained breathing, his rifle shaking in his claws. The Reaper pressed the barrel of his weapon to the alien's throat. His voice was low, steady, and cold. "Show me the chamber." The soldier obeyed, trembling as he led the way through corridors thick with smoke. The screams of dying men echoed behind them, each one a nail hammered deeper into the coffin of the Varric's arrogance. At last they reached the execution chamber. The alien collapsed to his knees, begging for mercy. The Reaper silenced him with a single shot, leaving the body to slump beside the door. He stepped inside and the air shifted. The room was unchanged from the day she had died, metal walls scarred with burns, a chair still bolted to the floor, the faint stench of charred flesh lingering like a ghost. He stood in the center, his gaze fixed on the place where she had fallen. The noise of battle dimmed behind him, fading into the edges of memory. For a moment he let himself remember. Her laughter. Her hand in his. The promises they had made. Then the moment ended. He turned back toward the door, his eyes cold once more. The prison's commander waited at the far end of the hall, flanked by guards who trembled as they aimed their weapons. His voice thundered in forced defiance. "You cannot undo her death, human. You cannot." The words ended with the crack of a shot. A hole burned clean through the commander's throat, cutting off his defiance mid-sentence. The guards panicked, firing wildly, but their fear ruined their aim. He moved through them like a storm through leaves, each shot placed with surgical certainty until none remained standing. The surviving staff fled deeper into the prison, abandoning their posts, their weapons, even their comrades. The Reaper followed at his own pace, unhurried, inevitable. Every corner turned revealed more corpses, more broken defenses, more proof that nothing could stand in his path. By dawn's cycle, the prison was no longer a fortress. It was a tomb. Yet he did not finish it. He stood once more in the execution chamber, alone, the bodies left behind him silent. His work was not complete, not yet. Vengeance was only half of what he had come for. The other half, the message, would echo louder than the screams of the dying. He knelt by the scorched floor where she had fallen, his gauntlet hand brushing the cold steel. His voice was almost a whisper, but the words carried weight enough to crush worlds. "They will remember you. Every last one of them." Then he rose, and the silence that followed was not peace. It was the silence before the storm spread across the stars. The station was coming apart. Sirens wailed like the screams of dying animals as bulkhead after bulkhead failed, and the carefully engineered silence of the void outside began to leak in. Smoke clogged the air, tinged with the metallic bite of blood and ozone. Soldiers staggered through the corridors, their armor dented, their weapons clutched like the last brittle straws of survival. No one spoke the word aloud, but every man and woman who still breathed knew the truth. Reaper was inside. He moved like a storm-given flesh, every step deliberate, every shot precise. The mercenary company had thrown wave after wave of hardened killers against him, and none returned. He didn't waste ammunition. He didn't waste motion. He didn't waste mercy. Somewhere, deep in the command deck, the man responsible for ordering the woman's execution, his wife, watched the surveillance feeds with trembling hands, his mouth dry, his chest heaving. He had thought Reaper was a myth, a cautionary tale whispered between veterans in backwater cantinas. But myths didn't tear apart platoons with their bare hands. Myths didn't stalk steel corridors while ignoring firepower that would level buildings. The surviving mercenaries tried to rally. Traps were laid, ambushes planned. They thought themselves predators lying in wait, but the truth revealed itself the moment the lights flickered and died. The men felt it, the shift from predator to prey, as the dark became Reaper's ally. They whispered to one another, voices cracking, hoping to convince themselves that they had a chance. But the first scream silenced the rest. Reaper struck like lightning, sudden and devastating. A man was lifted from the shadows, throat crushed before he could even cry out. A second dropped, chest plate punctured by a blade pulled from nowhere. The sound of gunfire thundered in the corridor, but every burst ended with silence, punctuated by the thud of another body. The mercenaries' formation collapsed. Panic spread like wildfire, and fear became a weapon sharper than steel. In the command deck, the leader, Commander Veyrak, a scarred veteran of a dozen campaigns, watched his men vanish one by one. Each red mark on the screen represented a soldier's life, and each flickered out until the screens glowed with nothing but the blue outline of the base itself. His throat worked dry when he realized that Reaper had disabled the cameras. He could no longer see him. He could only wait. Reaper wasn't running anymore. He wasn't surviving anymore. He was hunting. The bulkhead doors that protected the command deck were 3 feet thick, reinforced with alloys designed to withstand orbital bombardment. They were the last refuge, the last barrier between Veyrak and the inevitable. He ordered his remaining guards to hold steady, to focus fire, to remember their training. His voice cracked halfway through the command. They heard it. They knew. A thud shook the doors, like a fist of iron slamming into the very bones of the station. Another thud followed, louder than another. The men raised their rifles, eyes wide, as if the act of aiming would keep terror at bay. The pounding grew louder, faster, until it was a drumbeat that rattled their teeth. And then silence. The silence stretched, suffocating, until the door exploded inward with a scream of tortured metal. Smoke and sparks filled the chamber, and through the wreckage strode Reaper. His armor was scarred, his blade slick with blood, his eyes cold. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every man in that room knew who he was. The guards fired, but their bullets might as well have been pebbles thrown at a hurricane. He moved through them like death incarnate, each motion efficient, each strike final. In seconds, the command deck was littered with bodies, their weapons clattering to the floor in useless defiance. Only Veyrak remained, pressed against the command console, sweat dripping down his temple, pistol trembling in his grip. You don't have to do this," he stammered, his voice shrill, almost breaking. "It wasn't personal. Orders. Just orders. I didn't even know who she was." For the first time Reaper spoke. His voice was quiet, low, but it carried more weight than the chaos that had consumed the station. "She was my wife." Veyrak's knees buckled. His pistol slipped from his grip, clattering against the steel floor. "I didn't know. I swear. I swear." Reaper's blade pierced the console, sparks spraying as systems died around them. "You should have known. You should have cared." The commander whimpered, pressing himself further into the corner, but Reaper wasn't watching him anymore. His gaze had shifted to the stars beyond the viewport, where the fleets of mercenary companies and corporate sponsors lurked in orbit. The ones who had ordered her death. Veyrak was nothing more than a mouthpiece. The real culprits were still waiting, confident in their distance, believing that their fortress of ships and men would shield them from the storm they had summoned. Reaper pulled his blade free, letting it rest at his side. He looked at Veyrak one last time. "You'll carry the message." And then he was gone, leaving the commander alive, broken, his empire of mercenaries shattered in a single night. The fleets in orbit would hear of it. The corporations would hear of it. The galaxy would hear of it. Humanity's enemies would hear of it. The name Reaper, once a whispered rumor, would spread like wildfire, etched into the memory of every soldier who had ever pulled a trigger. They would know that they had not killed a woman in a cell. They had awakened something far worse. In the aftermath, survivors told stories. Some swore they saw him vanish into the void without a suit, the cold refusing to claim him. Others swore his blade burned with fire no forge could create. The details changed, exaggerated by fear, but the core never shifted. Reaper had come and nothing could stop him. But in the quiet that followed, when he finally removed his helmet and allowed himself to breathe, he felt the weight of her absence again. Every breath tasted of ash without her laughter. Every step felt hollow without her beside him. His war wasn't for glory. It wasn't for vengeance alone. It was because she had been his anchor to humanity, and without her, he had become exactly what they feared, something beyond human, something unstoppable. The climax of his fury had shattered one mercenary company, but the galaxy was vast and the rot ran deep. He would not rest. He would not stop. He would make them all remember her name. The man they called Reaper walked into the stars, his silhouette swallowed by the endless night, and the galaxy shivered. The galaxy remembered. Not in official communiques, Not in the clipped reports of the corporations that had once commanded fear, nor in the mercenary companies who had sworn themselves untouchable. Their silence was louder than any broadcast. Ships that had once patrolled sectors with arrogant banners now docked quietly, crews deserting in whispers. Recruitment offices stood hollow. The storm had gutted them from within, because fear was a predator that consumed faster than hunger. It began with survivors. Those broken men and women who staggered free of the blood-soaked station spoke in fragments, trembling as they tried to explain. They never agreed on the details. One swore he had seen Reaper move faster than the eye could follow, another that the man had walked unharmed through plasma fire, but every tale carried the same truth. They said his eyes burned like a furnace. They said the station itself trembled when he passed. They said death had taken a shape and it was human. The myths spread across trade lanes, whispered in the metallic rattle of cargo holds, in the thick smoke of taverns on asteroid outposts, in the fearful hush of officers' mess halls. At first it was only among the low ranks, those closest to the blood and steel of war. But soon even admirals turned pale when the name was mentioned. Even boardroom executives flinched when reports crossed their desks. Reaper had killed a company. Alone. Not just dismantled their operations, he had annihilated them body by body, ship by ship, until the few who remained were no more than husks dragging his story through the stars. For every tale of brutality, there was also one of restraint, of the commander spared to carry the warning. It was deliberate. It was a message carved into flesh and fear. This was not a ghost, not a myth, not a soldier. This was a man who had been wronged, and nothing in the galaxy could protect those responsible. And yet, in the quiet where the stories didn't reach, he was only human. Reaper sat alone in the cargo hold of a ship he had taken. It was nondescript, stripped of markings, a vessel that could slide through starports without raising alarms. He had cleaned the blood from his armor, but the scars remained, dark against the dull metal. His weapons lay at his side, gleaming in the dim light. But his hands were empty. He held a necklace. A simple band of metal worn smooth over years. It had belonged to her. He turned it slowly between his fingers, letting the chain coil around his hand. Sometimes he pressed it to his forehead, closing his eyes until memory cut through the silence. Her laugh echoed faintly in his chest. The way her hand fit into his, small and certain. The way she would tease him for sharpening his blades too often, as if violence was something one could plan for and store away neatly. He had not heard that laugh in months, yet it haunted him more vividly than the screams of the men he had killed. Revenge had felt like fire, burning hot enough to consume the world. But once the fire had passed, all that remained was ash. The galaxy feared him, but he feared the quiet. Because in the quiet there was no armor, no blade, no fury. There was only absence. He remembered the cell where she had been held. The images burned into his mind, her broken body, the indifferent execution. He could not save her. He had killed gods and monsters in his fury, but he could not change that. His war could reach across the stars but not back through time. And so he carried her absence with him, heavier than any weapon. Word of his path traveled faster than his ship. Systems he had never touched trembled at rumors of his approach. Mercenary companies disbanded overnight rather than risk his notice. Colonies under corporate control staged revolts, emboldened by the myth of the man who had destroyed an army alone. Whole fleets refused to launch, captains fabricating excuses, unwilling to test whether Reaper's shadow had fallen upon them. He did not seek these consequences. He had not thought beyond his vengeance. But the galaxy did not wait for permission to shape legends. On the world of Jorith, children began playing games called The Reaper Comes, where one child would stalk the others in silence until they screamed. In the asteroid belts of the Rose, smugglers used his name as a curse, muttering it under their breath when the engines failed. In the wealth-soaked towers of core systems, executives convened emergency meetings, debating how to contain a man they could not bribe, intimidate, or erase. For every corner of the galaxy the name became more than a warning. It became a reckoning. And yet he walked through starports unnoticed. He could sit in a corner booth, hood drawn low, and hear men spinning his legend 2 meters away, never realizing the figure they described sat listening in silence. He would leave before they finished, unable to bear the sound of his own name warped into something larger than life. He was not larger than life. He was life stripped bare, raw with grief, hollow with fury. He was only a man who had lost the one person who tethered him to gentleness. Some nights, when the stars lay still outside the viewport, he dreamed of her. Not the way she had died but the way she had lived. Her hair falling into her eyes when she worked. The way she would trace the scars on his arms as though mapping constellations. The softness in her voice when she said his name, not Reaper but the name only she had used, the name he had buried. He woke from those dreams choking, torn between rage and longing, and he never spoke them aloud. To give them voice would be to admit she was gone. The galaxy called him predator. Apex. But he knew the truth. He was prey, hunted by a memory he could never escape. Months passed. The corporations grew quieter. Some collapsed under their own fear. Others tightened their grip, desperate to prove they were unshaken. Fleets massed but rarely launched. Armies trained, but morale fractured when rumors of Reaper's presence surfaced. He did not need to fight them all. The myth fought for him. Still he did not stop. His war had no borders. He struck at convoys, dismantled outposts, shattered networks. Every target was chosen with precision. Every strike traced back to those who had played a hand in her death. He carved a path through the stars like a scar. And always he left survivors. Men broken in body and spirit, sent back to their masters with trembling voices and haunted eyes. They became the messengers of his legend, unwilling carriers of his truth. It was cruelty, but it was necessary. Fear traveled faster than fire. Yet with every victory he felt himself slip further from the man she had loved. She would not have wanted this. She had believed in him, in the goodness buried beneath the violence. She had pulled him back from the edge time and again. And now, with her gone, there was no one to call him back. One night, as he sat alone in the silence of his ship, he whispered her name into the dark. His voice cracked. It was the first time he had spoken it aloud since her death. The sound broke him open, raw and jagged, and for the first time since his war began he wept. Not the controlled grief of a soldier, but the full collapse of a man who had lost everything that mattered. When the tears finally stilled, he felt no lighter. But he felt her closer, if only for a moment. He knew then that his war would never end. He could burn the corporations to ash, topple the mercenary empires, make the galaxy kneel in fear, and still she would not return. His war was not for victory. It was for memory. It was the only way he knew to keep her alive. And so he rose again, strapped on his armor, and stepped once more into the void. The galaxy shivered. The myth grew. And somewhere, in the endless silence between stars, a man carried his grief like a blade, sharp enough to cut worlds apart. He was the Reaper. And he would not stop.